Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Canadian Rocketship Companies. I'm your host, Alex Norman, and this week I'm joined by the amazing Jennifer Arnold, co-founder and CEO of MinervaAI. Minerva is a reg tech startup focused on bringing together AI and automation to help fight financial crime. TechTO has spent the past 7 years telling stories of Canadian tech leaders, and we put the Canadian Rocketship List together because we kept getting asked, what company should I join? How can I make a difference in my career? I want to be involved in the ecosystem. So we went out to friends and basically did a survey of VCs and angels and said, what are the two or three companies that can make a difference in your career? And we got a list of 25 companies. And Minerva is one of them. And that's why we're doing this podcast. So let's get started. Let's welcome Jennifer to the stage.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining us. So why don't we start off with some background? Can you give us 30 seconds background, your background prior to founding Minerva? What did you do?
Sure. So prior to Minerva, I was the Senior Director of Anti-Money Laundering Transformation at CIBC and also the former VP of Governance and Programs at Wells Fargo, Canada. So I'm a reg nerd. That's where I come from.
So this is not something you just happen to get excited about one day.
No.
You eat, live, breathe, sleep, reg.
Yes, and banged my head against that wall for a few years.
And so, like you've spent lots of your career in the corporate world. Why make the leap to startup? Like what inspired you to do this?
You know what? It's the situation where I found a problem that I was willing to spend my life trying to solve. And that's the one of bad actors in our financial ecosystem and getting them out so we can put an end to things like human trafficking. So that was it. I couldn't do what I was doing anymore, knowing that it was really ineffective, and I wanted to tackle the problem from the other side.
And so interesting. So you heard it was ineffective. You want to tackle. Did you know how you're going to tackle it?
You know what? All of our early conversations started with me basically saying, if I had a magic wand, I would make it go like this. And then I found someone, our CTO, who could actually make it go like this. So I knew the problem that I wanted to solve, and I had a fair idea of what it would look like if we did it well.
Okay, I want to know more about your CTO in a minute, but before we get there, can you explain what Minerva does for people that aren't familiar with the company?
Yeah, sure. So Minerva is real-time client risk assessment in accordance with the anti-money laundering financial crimes regulations for Canada, the US, the UK, EU, South America, so on and so forth. So really, it's about doing a process that is called enhanced due diligence, which is where you really dig in on a client, whether they're a person or an organization, to understand the risk that comes with them and their kind of broader universe, not just them showing up on your doorstep with a driver's license and wanting to open an account.
Interesting. And then you had the idea that you wanted to solve it. How did you find a CTO, and how did you know they were the right person to start out with?
Oh my goodness. So we totally lucked out. So my co-founder Victor and I are both from banking, and we both worked in AML, and we were working on another venture together. It was like open banking a couple of years ago, but the world wasn't getting to where we needed them to get to. So we needed to change tax, and we decided we'd go after this work problem. And a friend of ours out at McMaster introduced us to our soon-to-be CTO. He said, I think I know somebody who's your magic wand. Can I introduce you? And we were like, yeah, sure. And it's this guy who is using AI in cancer research and was just wrapping up his master's, and we snagged him.
Yeah. So you snagged him. Was it hard to convince him to join you?
It wasn't actually. It's his interpretation was it's just another kind of cancer that we're trying to identify. When we talked about financial crime and bad actors, and the AI that he had built to work on his thesis had a lot of similarities between how we wanted to identify actors and aggregate the information and perform the analysis.
Interesting. And then as part of your growth, and you get the team together, you've gone through a few different accelerators. For example, you've been part of Next Canada. What advice do you give to founders or other people considering going through these programs?
You know what? So we were total noobs to being a startup and to being a tech startup. And so getting into Next was really exciting for us. It was about finding a community and being able to have conversations with people who are more or less in the same boat. and when I talk to startups, I'm like, you need to know what you're looking for. So if what you're looking for is your basic, like what's a startup 101, then there's a certain kind of accelerator where you want to go and you want to get that. And then if there's something more practical and tactical and get you to market, that's a different kind of accelerator, and be able to identify the programs to go from one to the other.
And I think you've been part of CDL, Next Canada, Accelerators. And we'll just love to say, what would you recommend each one for?
So Accelerators, I can't say enough wonderful stuff about. It comes with an amazing community, and it is really about getting you in front of customers, in front of investors. It's about getting all of the stuff that you don't know that you need to have, things like data rooms and collateral and an investor deck. Like, it's very just get you up and running. And I really, really appreciated that. NextAI was kind of like an MBA shoved into 4 months, which was useful for me because I don't have like that kind of business background. I come from business, but certainly not from that. So that was interesting. And Professor Agarwal at NextAI is like the most wonderful human being. And he brought in amazing guests to come in and talk to us about AI, people from all over the world. And it was really, really interesting. CDL is more about mentorship. And one-on-one time with like a really high quality, this is your best buddy for the next 6 months kind of thing, and giving you real-time feedback on what it is that you're doing.
That's awesome, and that's very helpful for everyone listening. So on the Canadian Rocketship List, we have a range of companies, anywhere from a startup, which I'd put you into, scaling companies. So as a startup, how do you know things are working? Like, do you have product market fit yet? I mean in the best way, right? Like,
yeah,
so
no, it depends on the day,
yeah.
right? Yeah, it does. It depends on the day. So this is what I knew was, we met Damien. I did if I could have a magic wand, I would do this. He said, let me think about it. In a week, he called me and said, come here, I want to show you something. And he had built Minerva's first neural engine. And I'm like, okay, I'm sold. And then she executed her first search. It was a very limited search, but it was so freaking fast and accurate. And I'm like, oh God. And then, you just get that thing in your stomach. You're like, yep. Okay, this is it. And then, getting into accelerators is kind of like a false positive, because it's great to get in, but just because you get in doesn't mean that your idea is going to, fly in the real world. And it's sort of this weird progression of looking for the right signals and being able to talk to people who would use your product, get feedback early on, being able to iterate really quickly. And I think for us, something material changed like this time last year. And it was because Minerva had actually matured so much in a year. We'd been in dev dark for almost 2 years. Yeah. And she was a totally different beast. And so when we showed her to people, the reaction was, oh, and lots of, how are you doing that? I'm like, well, I'm not going to tell you that part. Yeah. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, I love the answer. And then let's play this out forward, because again, other company analysts, Clearco, you have an idea what they'll look like in a few years. When I think about your future, I think it's 10 years out. So what does Minerva look like in 10 years?
I have quite a few thoughts on that. When I think about Minerva 10 years out, I think of her being this tipping point for an entire industry, and that is of anti-money laundering compliance, however you want to phrase it, of a monumental shift in how we're trying to solve the problem, right? We are building stuff on regulations that were inked 30, 40 some odd years ago. And lots of, technology and processes are also of the same age, and they're no longer fit for purpose. But the idea of reimagining all of that, I think, is quite painful for a lot of folks, especially when you're deep in it. So when I look at Minerva 10 years out, she is the way to be able to assess client risk at any point in the relationship, but certainly at the onset of the relationship. And she's also built in such a way that we've future-proofed her so that as regulations and law change as it relates to sharing information across financial institutions or financial service providers, being able to open up those gates for institutions to be able to share that information when and where it is appropriate. And then I also think of, we have this blunt instrument called transaction monitoring that we use to look at suspicious transactions. It's kind of malarkey. And And I think that if you had the kind of rules engine of thresholds better tuned to discrete market segments of your clients, combined with the contextual data that you get from Minerva, you actually have a shot at getting the right person at the right time.
Yeah, I guess it's important to get to avoid false positives and false negatives.
Yes.
And then as a reg tech company, I think you're in an interesting space because your stakeholders are your customers, I guess, like banks and insurance companies, their customers, and government regulators.
Yeah.
So how do you manage all three? And do you have to treat them? Are they all as important? And yeah, I would love to hear how you think about that.
You know what? One of the things that we've learned, and again, having worked on bank side for a really long time, I kind of embarrassed that it took the penny to drop for a little bit, but they're big monsters and they're really slow to move and they're really slow to innovate, and banks are a tough target that way. Interestingly, I would say that regulators, insurance and otherwise, are more open because they know that they have an industry that they're trying to govern and they're slowly starting to fall behind.
Interesting. So two trends I want to pick up around that. One is, let's say the geopolitical situation has been changing dramatically over the last few years. I imagine that'll impact regulatory, like GDPR with the movement of data. I could see the US and China not wanting to get certain information out there. So how does that impact your business and how do you react to that?
So there's just a big part of the job that's staying on top of what's happening and taking a look at what's happening. And certainly, since Biden and Biden's administration has come in, there's been a kind of a recommitment to the infrastructure that manages financial crime and risk in that way. So I think what's coming, less so about the geopolitical piece, more so about payments and crypto and other new finance getting hit with the full weight of the regulations, just as a giant legacy bank does, and not having the resources or the wherewithal to be able to sustain that. And I think that's a real opportunity, is to look at those very innovative businesses and say, let us solve this problem for you so you can go run, grow, acquire your customers, and know that your back end is taken care of from a regulatory perspective.
Yeah, and so you got to a second trend I was going to talk about, like DeFi or crypto or blockchain. I guess it's a lot of opportunity, but also just a very different mindset. So do you see yourself having to come up with a decentralized product for crypto, or is it working with people that are trying to be like the BlockFis of the world? What's the opportunities and threat that crypto and blockchain represent for you?
So the crypto piece, and certainly from a platform perspective, they are obligated to understand the client's risk when they come in the door, to apply some sort of differentiation to them, high, medium, low risk, to monitor them accordingly, to do enhanced due diligence, to conduct investigations when they do something wonky. Exact same stuff that they need to do at a bank. So you know what? Happy to help and happy to provide that service to anyone who's interested. And when I look at I kind of don't think, at least the way the regulators are thinking now, I'm not sure it matters too much how that, whether it's embedded finance, decentralized, it doesn't really matter. That the requirements are going to persist.
Excellent. And so it's actually, when I hear reg tech, it's not the place I usually get excited about, but I actually think you're in a very exciting place right now, because I think the world of finance is changing so dramatically. If I look forward, what are your hiring needs over the next 12 months? What do you think you're going to look for? Because one of the reasons we're here is to talk about great places to join.
So we are just starting that amazing cycle of I need sales and dev and sales and dev and sales and dev to kind of keep up with the demand of what's building. So right now we're looking for a senior web developer, and oddly have not, we've posted everywhere. We haven't had a lot of applicants, and that's slightly distressing. And we're also we're also trying to find the right sales hire, but the culture piece is a really big deal to me. It is to the entire team, but it's a really big deal to me. And so there's stuff that I need to be able to understand about an individual when we're going through that interview process.
So tell us about the culture and what the important parts are for you.
You kind of got to drink the Kool-Aid, man. Like you have to be on board with the mission, and the mission is, probably most simply put, like let's put an end to human trafficking, because there's no need for it to be a growth industry, and yet here it is. And the tools that we're using are not the right tools. And so if you can, get on board with the idea that you're actually doing good, that it's work that matters, that despite the fact that so much of regulation has turned into a tick box exercise, there is merit in the work being done properly, but we're so far away from that place, right? We've created this narrative where you can either be really effective, but super duper expensive, or you can be really, really productive, but have really low quality. And I say, that's BS. You can have both. You just need to be able to harness the tools that are out there today to be able to both be efficient and effective at what you're doing.
And I also love something else I heard there, because you're saying it's not a compliant, you don't exist for compliance reasons, even though that's your purpose for your clients.
Exactly.
But it's also to actually enable people to operate business and stop the evils of the world. Or so there is a higher level purpose here, and looking at regulatory is a net positive, which I love. And then so you have a culture where someone drinks the Kool-Aid. They're going to have a big impact in the world. What is there any other specific reasons they should join your team? What else should get someone excited about coming?
You know what? We are very into what we're doing and very serious about what we do, but we're not a terribly serious group of people. We're kind of a bunch of goofballs. So I would say that we're really fun to work with on whole. Like everyone's got a good sense of humor. And because we're so young, that there's still not a lot of fence building going on. It's the best idea or the best execution is the one that we're going to talk about. It doesn't really matter where it came from. So if you want to contribute to the DNA of an organization, this is the time to join.
And just to give some context, how many people are you currently?
Well, we started out with 3 and now we are 6.
So you've doubled, but it's 6 is still a relatively small team. And are you, I can't remember, are you distributed, or everyone's distributed now, but are you going to be working from an office?
You know what? I mean, we love the idea of having some sort of shared space where we can come together, but we were born in COVID, right? So it kind of is, it just is what it is right now. We communicate very effectively through Signal and through Zoom and, regular stand-ups about what's going on, not just with our business, but with each other and kind of where's everybody at. So I would like in, maybe a year's time to have a place that is ours, even if it's shared. But I'm okay with this right now.
I'm just curious, I'm going to go on a tangent here. What do you think the positives or negatives are? How do you think being born in COVID impacted the company?
It's funny because people are like, well, how did it affect your business? I'm like, how would I know? Because this is just the world that I'm in, right? And what it did do was draw attention to some really interesting things. Like the banks have been dragging their heels forever about work from home and it's not viable and we can't do it, yada, yada. And yet they kind of managed to sort it out in 10 days after we went into lockdown a year ago, right? But then that also put stress on their internal systems, sending everybody at home, 200, 300 investigators with a VPN. You can actually offload some of that weight by using tools like Minerva instead of trying to funnel everything through your VPN.
Interesting. And VPNs always work so well.
Flawless.
And so other than someone drinking the Kool-Aid, what other characteristics or personality or what else do you look for that as you're going from 6 to 7 and 6 to 12, is there certain traits? Is there something that makes someone successful?
So I think there's one that's a really big deal for me. And that is identify before you do anything, just really identify the problem you're trying to solve before you get excited about something. Because people are really good about conjuring up solutions for a problem that's not quite identified. And that's really frustrating. So for me, I need to see that in the thinking of this, this process of really digging in deep and understanding what the process is. And then I think part of that is curiosity. If you have to be a toddler and ask why 50 times, I'm totally fine with that. I will answer your whys.
I think I need you to come here and help me with my kids. That's a whole other discussion. If you can get the reg tech and the kid tech. And the other question I have is, what's your relationship with the big, like your clients are potentially really large financial institutions. So they look at you, you're 10 employees.
Yeah.
How do you empower the employees to have those conversations? Because I can imagine you're talking to someone at TD and they're like, well, I want to see the founder.
Yeah.
So how do you look at empowering people to work with their counterparts? And then I'd love to hear just like, how do you give the large companies confidence to work with you?
Yeah. So honestly, being a little more mature and having secured some backing has certainly helped with that part of the conversation. Knowing that you're not going to run out of runway in 3 to 6 months and completely, upend whatever process they put in place to use your technology in the first place. Right now we are still very much founder-led sales, and whoever's coming in for that sales role is coming along for this ride, because at some point it's got to be them and not me doing that part of the job.
Cool. And if someone wants to get in touch with you, Jennifer, or apply to the developer position or sales position, how do they get in touch with you?
So the job is posted on my LinkedIn. My email is there's a career email on the website, and I'm pretty easy to find.
So
just email me.
Just for people listening to this and not watching the live version, what is your email? What is the LinkedIn account? So what is the URLs?
Okay, so if you just go to MinervaAI.io, there is a careers link on the site, and I think it might just be careers at MinervaAI.io. My LinkedIn is Jennifer Arnold. There's also a LinkedIn site for Minerva, which is MinervaAI, and I think it's posted there as well.
Cool. Anything I didn't ask that I should have asked that you'd like the world to know?
I'm just trying to think. I think we're in an exciting place to be right now, because the environment that we're working in has so many systemic issues. If you look at how things are being traditionally done. And so the opportunity to create and expand and kind of resolve the problem is a really interesting piece of work that will make a huge difference. And if that's anyone's cup of tea, come find me.
I'm super excited. I actually get excited about RegTech. Maybe it's because I've been at AngelList and see all the regulatory stuff we have to set up in Canada and in the States and globally. So I'm super excited you could join us, Jennifer. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we'll be talking again in the future.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe to the TechTO newsletter to stay informed of what's going on in the Canadian tech ecosystem. We cover everything from company news to career advice to great events and podcasts like this. So if you haven't signed up yet, go to techto.org and look for the newsletter and make sure it comes to your inbox. And if you want to hear the previous podcast, you can look for Canadian Rocketship podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you all for joining us.